Welcome back to episode 3, Our Tax Dollars at Work. I'm one of your co-hosts, Sahana Purohit, along with Greg Jarbo and John Peterson. In this episode, we are going to be talking to the junior high principal, Jim Marcotte, who was in the midst of making sure that his students reached home safe and the communication that happened during that period.
And there's a real lesson in here because we tend to just think of principals as, oh yeah, that's the educational setting, right? Well, it turns out his number one priority was keeping students safe.
And the other thing that was, important in this part of the response is timing always matters. And it turned out that the microburst hit right before school dismissal, which presented both a special opportunity and a special challenge for the junior high.
So my job then was to try to communicate calm to the building, because most, at that time, new students, certainly staff, are very used to when the bell rings at 2:36, they go to their lockers and they leave. And so I had to be quick enough to get on the PA to say, there's a situation, you're seeing the weather, you're hearing the thunder, we're not going to dismiss yet. And luckily, not luckily, because it's how it's built, the staff of the junior high is great, and they accommodated that so easily. So we all switched.
But the junior high had power through the whole event?
That's what I was actually trying to remember earlier. I think that we lost power for some portion of it. The saving grace was that our PA system was on battery backup, so that still worked throughout, which was integral. And our Wi-Fi actually worked for much or all of it as well. So we had what we needed. We didn't have lights necessarily in all spaces, but that was okay. It was still bright enough out. But what we did rely on was our use of our two-way radios, our walkie-talkies that, we have several at the junior high, all schools are outfitted. And we flipped to kind of what is our emergency all-call channel. At that point is when central office kind of took over decision-making and communication about what would we do next.
We also have school that's letting out. What do we do there? So, communicating with the schools and making sure that they're on the same page so that we can hold buses and we can keep kids in the buildings where we know they're safe. And so it was all hands on deck. The severity of the storm was clearly evident as soon as we got out on the road, and the timing actually couldn't have been better in terms of us, starting to respond as school was just getting out or close to getting out. So we were able to make that decision. I remember speaking with Peter Light as from the road, saying, "Listen, we need to do something here. We have a serious situation here." And I believe I talked with Jim Marcotte from the junior high, as well as Joni Dean from the high school, just to, because they were the next school getting out at that hour. So I think that's vital because, putting 40 buses out onto those roads was not going to do good for, not going to be good for anybody.
So, and as you said, obviously it's the central office that ultimately makes these kind of decisions. Did you know anything about the kind of communication they were able to establish with the police and fire and DPW during the event?
Not as much as someone from that office could maybe speak to. I do know that when they were speaking to us with plans, they were referencing having heard from, certainly we work with our school resource officers really closely. And who else on that end of it, I actually don't know who they were working with, but what we started to see and hear, once the rain slowed down and the wind kind of slowed down, we were able to step outside. And what we were seeing was police cars up and down 111, kind of making their way to whatever was going on in town. So we all recognize, this is a major and important town moment. And we play a small part in that, of course.
And then in terms of the decision to ultimately roll buses, were there bus routes that you actually just had to reconfigure in order to get students back home? How did that work?
Yeah, there were bus routes we had to deal with, but we didn't know at the time. So our decision so we dismiss at 2:36 normally. We probably call for dismissal around 3 o'clock. So we held kids for 25 minutes in their homerooms or their final periods of the day. Then we called for students to come out on the buses. We canceled all after school activities, not wanting kids to be hanging out for cross country. So once the buses started to roll, okay, we're in good shape. We had lost a major tree in the front of the school and things like that. So we were kind of assessing that. The challenge, first of all, actually was getting all the buses off campus. Because then at that moment, everything was gridlocked. There was no car moving anywhere. Because certainly lots of families had come, waited 25 minutes to take their kids home. So they were trying to leave the school campus buses needed to get out. And I remember seeing Peter Light across Charter Road, him outside of his own office building, trying to get a handle on what it was. So the police helped us certainly with navigating, getting kids in buses off campus. So the buses all rolled. Within 20 or 30 minutes, buses came back. They came back with kids because I certainly remember the area of Willow Street, certainly North Acton area, Route 2A. Buses couldn't get everywhere that they needed to go. And so the problem was then we were having kids returning to school and us thinking, okay, now what? And I luckily had my whole admin team there and several teachers and our office staff who were still there to help. So kids were coming back in and we were just saying, don't worry, like we're good. We signed them back in to make sure we knew who we had. We set up the library. They certainly could use their Chromebooks if they wanted to. Some were just reading, and some were chilling out.
Do you have any idea about how many students was that? Was that like a couple hundred students?
No, not that many. We probably had maybe 75 get returned. And so then what we were simultaneously doing is trying to identify, okay, bus 20, if that was one of the buses, got returned, and then we were sending messages to families of bus 20 students. If your child hasn't returned home, it's because they're back here at the junior high, please come over. And so many did relatively quickly. They could make their own way around some barriers, or they're coming from somewhere else. And so they were, they were super grateful of the decision we made to hold a dismissal at the time, as well as that we brought them back, kept them safe, made them happy. And so that worked well. We were probably back for 45 minutes, an hour. And I was just thinking, I don't know how long this is going to go. Because I didn't know, could these families get back to us? Could they? I didn't know what the other towns looked like. And so we actually made a decision at the junior high to go get some pizza. And so New London was great. They were open. They made us a bunch of pizzas. We went and picked them up, brought them back. And so everyone who was there kind of felt like, okay, I'm here for a little while. I have no idea for how long.
But it was Friday.
But it's Friday. I can be comfortable. I can sit and do my thing and have some pizza. So that was one of those kind of like in the moment decisions we made, like, oh, this will feel better if we can kind of make some comfort here. And so, our last student was picked up at 6 o'clock that night. And he was the last one remaining. And I remember he was sitting with one of our assistant principals, and this student I remember he loves sneakers, and so they were looking at their favorite sneakers online just to kind of kill some time, make a connection, but also waiting for his mom to come. And so by 6 o'clock, everything was wrapped up. And the funny part, I only live in Maynard, 3 miles down the road. And by the time I got home at 6 o'clock, my daughters were at soccer practice doing their thing. And they knew that there was a storm, but it just didn't hit there the same way that it hit here.
Right. That's one of the things that we've talked about is the fact that the Acton Microburst was really the Acton Microburst, because I was actually up in Lowell and came down from Lowell. So in Lowell, obviously there was a storm, but it was like, it's raining, I'm driving back home. And it really was not until I got very close to Acton that all of a sudden it's like, you're not going on that road.
Right.
Have you talked to students, since then? What reactions did they have to the event? Was this sort of a fun twist to the beginning of the school year?
I think most of them took it as that. Certainly bizarre and something hoped to not be repeated, that you stay at school late because of a weather event. But I do remember the students who got returned to school that day feeling a little uneasy. What's going to happen? And many of them have their own devices. They could communicate with their parents for sure. But beyond that, they were kind of ready to move on. The staff, I remember that evening, I sent out an email to the staff at RJ Gray, just saying thank you. Thanks for holding, thanks for being patient, thanks for doing what we asked you to do, and this is how it resulted. 6 o'clock, the last student was picked up, and we hope that kids are home. And then I do remember that certainly the cleanup took a long time, and we kind of as a district said for that following Monday, like no tests, no quizzes, no homework due, because many of our kids have lived in homes throughout the weekend with no power. So it was one of those other side effects of like, we've got to be human here and make decisions that feel right, which is generally, I think we do a good job of that. So it's certainly a memorable and not want to be repeated. But when I give safety presentations to students, and we just did them over the past 2 days, we talk about things like fire drills and Alice drills, and I reference to them, I start the question, how do we keep you all safe? And they throw out answers, doors are locked, and all the right answers. And I just say, we have plans. We have plans for stuff. And so we've never planned for a microburst before. But in the background, there's always a thoughtful approach to how do we communicate, what's important, how do we get public safety involved when we need to. And so change the situation to be something different. Those tenets would still be there about good decision making and safety for kids.
You know, one of the things that the schools did is they decided, hey, we're not going to let students out onto the road, you know, while there's an active event. We're going to do a delayed. So
Right.
what happened with your son?
I don't know. I think he was probably playing basketball or something, because it was around 2:30. So I think it was after the end of class. I'm fairly certain that he had ridden his bike, and we were able to contact him by cell phone, and said, "We'll just walk home." And then we were periodically in conversation, and he'd be coming down Minot and say, "Oh, well, there's a tree down." And everybody in the neighborhood got out to help and help direct traffic. There was a Ukrainian family on Minot that had the magic path that went from the Conant through their backyard and then back on to around the utility pole. So they were directing all these students that were walking home from school, both from the Conant school and from the junior high school complex. It was unbelievable.
How would you say that the town's response was?
For the amount of work that it was done, I felt like the town did an amazing job at first triaging to make sure, you know, to guarantee public safety, like to make sure that the roads were clear, to make sure that, you know, the places in the most need were getting their attention. You know, just one small example, as I mentioned earlier, my daughter teaches at the high school. And, you know, that evening she told us that, you know, that they had stayed, the teachers stayed there for an extra hour or so until it was safe for the kids to leave. And that was, you know, she was describing it. Everyone's like, of course we're going to do that.
You know, the staff, I remember that evening I sent out an email to the staff at RJ Gray just saying thank you. You know, thanks for holding, thanks for being patient, thanks for doing what we asked you to do. And this is how it resulted. 6 o'clock, the last student was picked up, you know, and we hope that kids are home. And then I do remember that certainly the cleanup took a long time.
Yep.
And we kind of as a district said for that following Monday, like no tests, no quizzes, no homework due, because many of our kids have lived in homes throughout the weekend with no power.
Yep.
So it's one of those other side effects of like, yeah, we've got to be human here and make decisions that feel right, which is generally, I think we do a good job of that. So. Yeah, it's certainly a memorable and not want to be repeated. But when I give safety presentations to students, and we just did them over the past 2 days, we talk about things like fire drills and Alice drills, and I reference to them, I start the question, how do we keep you all safe? And they throw out answers, doors are locked, and all the right answers. And I just say, we have plans. We have plans for stuff. And so we've never planned for a microburst before, but in the background, there's always a thoughtful approach to how do we communicate, what's important, how do we get public safety involved when we need to. And so change the situation to be something different. Those tenets would still be there about good decision making and safety for kids. So,
But each of those events, of course, gives an opportunity to test the plans, see how good they are, to look at some things that you can look back and say, wow, that was a great decision that we held the buses.
Right.
And, you know, that was also an outstanding decision. Let's eat some pizza because, you know, everything is better with food.
Right.
But, of course, when you go through those things, there's also a chance to say, and here's some areas where our plans were not as helpful as they might have been.
Right.
What changes, if any, were made to some of that emergency response after the microburst?
we did do that debrief as a senior leadership team for the district, all the principals, central office admin, and really went through that protocol of, all right, what worked well, what could have been better. And we all kind of thought that the idea that when we were ready to dismiss, we were sending kids and families out to what was the unknown. You know, we didn't know that Willow was closed. We didn't know that parts of Great Road were closed. So that would have been helpful had we had that. We thought it could have been helpful had we, again, with the idea of like actually starting to dismiss, and I said we couldn't leave our campus because we were just jammed in. So probably working differently or better with Acton Police at that time. And both of those things acknowledging, as I already referenced, their cars were flying down 111 to go deal with situations that were active and potentially dangerous, as well as the idea of communicating back to the schools. We weren't the only gig in town that day. You know, people needed to know other things. So I think we all took it as, yes, in the future, if we could do this in an ideal way, we would help these things communicate along the way. But there was no blame there because it was so, everyone was really doing the best they could with what needed to be done at the time. So
It's an interesting test because obviously the school has to deal with weather all the time, and we build 5 days for snow or whatever into the calendar every year. But there really are sort of two kinds of events. There's the big, long duration events. So for people who remember it, when Hurricane Gloria came in, if a hurricane's coming, you know a hurricane's coming. You might not know exactly what it's going to be like, but you know you got something that you have to deal with. And also true for some big snowstorms. But there are always, you know, these shorter events with uncertain timing and uncertain intensity. You know, and in this particular case, actually, there were two things that were sort of fortunate. One is that it actually got started before buses were rolling, because that would have been interesting, not in a good way. And that the duration of the event was such that, a couple hours is, you know, not what anybody planned, but not a huge disruption. It's not like we need to figure out how to keep everybody safe overnight. You know, it
was 45 minutes later and the sun was out. You know, it was one of those types of things. And so I agree with you.
And obviously, you know, for your family, you know, although you were dealing with stuff, you know, the rest of your family was off in Maynard. Everything is fine. But, you know, there are events sort of like this that could be in the not so easily predicted, affecting a bigger geographic area, having a longer duration. Have you had any thoughts or conversations after this event about how you deal with that uncomfortable, you know, intermediate case?
No, to be honest, we haven't. You know, we haven't played out, okay, take this scenario and make it harder. We haven't done that. But I think coming back to
I'll be sure to bring that up at a future school committee meeting, you know, where everybody will appreciate it.
Let's really play this tabletop exercise out. No, the idea is, I think, we could deal with lots of things, but we would need the support of other organizations to help us, and the organization that we have already within our district. You know, we just have a nice, solid leadership team that communicates well, and you know, has some humor and can enjoy ourselves. But we all come back to, you know, my job as the principal really is safety, and so I need to make decisions about, you know, the 825 students we have and the 100 staff members. Because that really matters. You know, your families have sent their kids to me in my care for those 6.5 hours a day. I need to get them home in the same way. So yeah, I just appreciate that we have, in that case, and I know in a future case, would work together to figure out what we need. And frankly, anytime we call Acton Police Department, Acton Fire Department, they say, yeah, how can we help? You know, that's really the mantra that they bring to the work that we do with them. So I know that if anything were longer duration or harder than it was, it'd be equally challenging and in the moment making decisions, but I think we do the best we could.
Which touches on another really important issue, which is obviously we do lots of things to try to reduce risk, but risk never goes to zero. And obviously we also spend a lot of time trying to plan, but even though we plan and run a good process, sometimes we make decisions that in retrospect is like, yeah, that was the wrong call. And I think one of the things that I've appreciated, you know, in the school district, that there's some honesty about, you know, risk isn't going to go to zero. It's just not possible. So we're going to do things to reasonably reduce risk. And likewise, on the decision-making front, we're going to work hard to make good decisions, but we're not going to fool ourselves and think that we're not going to make some bad decisions. So I think that's something that everybody struggles with. You know, everybody wishes that they wouldn't make a mistake, yet it's impossible. And I hope that one of the things that the students can see when they see you and staff is they see that honesty. And from my view, that's so important because that's what gives them the freedom to be people who make decisions and make mistakes.
Absolutely.
Which, you know, is the key to being successful. You make that mistake, you learn, and life goes on.
What you've just heard is emergency management at its most human scale. This episode shows that protecting children in a crisis isn't only about procedures, it's about judgment, reassurance, and trust. When dismissal plans failed and buses turned back, school leadership adapted in real time, shifting from logistics to care, from movement to shelter, and from efficiency to empathy. The response worked because communication never stopped. Through PA announcements, radios, Wi-Fi systems, and personal outreach to families. Just as importantly, leaders understood that in moments of uncertainty, reassurance itself is a form of safety. The lesson learned from this episode is clear. A principal's most important job isn't about instruction, it's protection. And when schools, public safety, and families work together, even an unplanned crises can be met with calm, compassion, and confidence.